So, in today's video we will look at other evolutionary algorithms, particularly we will look at a very interesting algorithm known as differential evolution. So, this is a very powerful tool for parameter estimation in biological systems especially, and it is well implemented in this tool called PyGMO, which we will talk about in the next video. And in today's video I will also talk to you about implementing evolutionary algorithms, what are the aspects, various aspects that we need to consider, and we will also discuss as to when evolutionary algorithms are actually very useful, as in when do you give up on the other kinds of algorithms and go in for evolutionary algorithms. Okay, welcome back. Let us continue with our study of some more evolutionary algorithms. To recap, all evolutionary algorithms, the slide is titled genetic algorithms, but all evolutionary algorithms would fit this bill. Essentially they evolve populations of solutions. The representation will vary from one to the other, and the key concepts remain the same. So, you can talk about population, chromosome, mutation, recombination or crossover, fitness function, selection and so on. So, we already looked at some of these things. Let us just look at a few more flavors of evolutionary algorithms. So, one important algorithm is known as differential evolution. This is designed as a stochastic parallel direct search method. So, it is stochastic in that, so there is some randomness in how different points are picked and so on, and it is of course a direct search method, and it can be very nicely implemented in parallel. So, this thrives on a population of vectors which can be independently manipulated. So, which is similar to what most other evolutionary algorithms do, or in case even genetic algorithms, right. So, in genetic algorithms as well you have populations of bit vectors, here you have populations of potentially numerical vectors. You have an initial vector population which is spread across the entire parameter space. So, you have a parameter space in R to the n potentially, right. So, you have vectors that cover different parts of the space, and now you need to come up with ways to do mutation and crossover, right. You need certain random operators, you need a fitness function, you need selection pressures or selection strategies and so on. So, how do you do the mutation, right. So, one way of doing a mutation is by adding some weighted difference between two vectors to a third vector. You pick two vectors at random, you compute the difference between those two vectors and add that difference to a third vector, right. So, some multiplied by f, some alpha, right. So, you weight that in some way. So, add 5% of the difference, 20% of the difference to a third vector. You repeat this multiple times, you get more children, more population. And then for crossover what you do is a little more simple, you do parameter mixing, or essentially you pick at random from each, right. So, you mix the two to get a third vector. Let us say this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I am just marking the positions A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. You might get a vector that is 1, B, C, 4, 5, 6, G, H, right. You randomly pick from, so you mix the parameters up, you can mix them in different ways, right. So, this is the recombination operator in the case of differential evolution. So, essentially you need the same thing, you need two or more if you can search operators, mutation, you can even think of this as global and local, right. Two operators that look in two different styles on the search space that you have. Well, it depends, right. So, mutation you can't necessarily map it to global and local, but if you look at recombination you are sort of trying to take an so in this case mutation would be more local in differential evolution, because you are like adding the difference between two vectors to a third, and recombination could be more global, in which because you are like picking random pieces and so on, but it really depends. But neither of these would be purely global or purely local, right, but together they do two different types of search essentially. Oh, very simple. So let us call this vector alpha, this vector beta. So you will say gamma is gamma plus some fraction into alpha minus beta. How do you do selection? You can again use several strategies. The usual recommended selection procedure here is greedy. So you try to select more of the best solutions or pick the top k solutions and move on. Right? This was the original differential evolution that was proposed by Stone and Price in 1997. There are many variants to it today. Some of them work very efficiently, particularly in case of biological problems. Evolution strategies are also popular for solving these kinds of optimization problems. In general, the major difference between evolution strategies and GAS or DE differential evolution is that real numbers are used instead of other data structures, right. See, if you see, bit vector is actually a sort of a data structure in some sense, right. It represents something, as it could even represent a circuit for all you know, right, an electrical circuit as we discussed earlier. And the interesting part is there are strategy parameters. These are the genes that affect the evolutionary process. So more biology in some sense, right. So these are genes. You can think of these as the genes that control the rate of evolution, maybe the recombinases, the enzymes involved in the SOS response or DNA replication and so on, right. And even the parameters evolve. So your mutation rate and recombination rate, they themselves evolve, so something like that. And the genotype adapts to alter the evolutionary process itself, right. So the whole system keeps evolving at every point of time, right. So essentially if you see, the overall template is the same. What is, if you scale back a few steps, right, we said what are the different in the hierarchy of algorithms. We basically said GAs, DEs or DE, evolution strategies, whatever else, they all broadly come under evolutionary algorithms. These all broadly come under maybe direct search algorithms. If you see, the template is the same for all direct search algorithms, be it simulated annealing or any of the other methods. I actually have a few more methods listed a little later on, we will maybe come back to that. So the recipe is the same, and what is the recipe? You start with an initial population, maybe and you need to come up with a representation for the population. That is the first catch, right. It is probably one of the hardest steps, right, because this is where you need to think. Beyond that, it is all just the recipe. The computationally, what is the hardest step?
Computing the function.
Computing the fitness function over and over again, because you want to calculate the fitness of the entire population. So you need to compute the fitness function over and over again. So that is a problem, right. So you can have trees or other kinds of complex data structures. You can have Cartesian genetic programming, that is something I mentioned earlier, so on and so forth. So you may have, for scheduling, you may have a very different kind of data structure, right. So you need to come up with representation paradigms, and you need search operators. You can have macro mutation, so large changes in alleles without recombination. So mutate several genes, several bits, right. Hybrid operators that don't really have anything to do with evolution. You can have like a hill climbing operator that will just increase the value in a particular direction, right. It does not have to truly honor the evolutionary process. You can have operations for permutations, very useful in case of traveling salesperson and problems such as those. Learning operators, where individuals alter their chromosomes before replication based on some parameters and so on. And evolving operators, by encoding something like mutation probability into the chromosomal representation itself, right. So this is where we talked about self-adapting chromosomes and so on. So essentially you need operators, right, and there is a big library of possible operators to choose from. Another very simple operator is, so this is a a simple operator for this is for DE for evolution strategies. Very simple operator is, let us say there is a parameter theta 1, just add a randomly distributed variable to it, right. It is already a search operator, right. So, this is actually a very simple search operator, and evolution strategies use such simplistic search operators, but you can draw it from any interesting distribution, not necessarily just normal. So, you can have different kinds of operators as well, right. And yeah, you had a question.
Learning and mutation seems similar before application.
So in what is the difference between learning and mutation? When can you learn?
I know which direction
You need a teacher, right. So, you basically need something that tells you whether you are doing well or not. You need some evaluation cycle, right. So, you like a classifier, you need to basically, let us say you build a classifier, when you say it has learned, you basically test against some data and see that the performance has improved after you have added some more data to the training kind of thing. Whereas here this evolving operators could just be arbitrary. Let us say I have a chromosome that encodes along with all my thetas and so on, it also encodes the hyperparameters, they will like randomly just jump around, right. I am going to randomly mutate it. So, maybe I mutated the hyperparameter instead of mutating the my parameter, the parameter we are trying to estimate here. So, that is a possibility, whereas there is in a sense there is no direction, whereas learning will try to proceed in the direction of improving something. And selection, so you can try to replace worst or replace at random, you can have tournament selection, you can have fitness proportionate selection, you can have elitism and anything else that you can actually come up with. You can use different kinds of selection pressures or selection methods. So, to summarize, the main applications of GAS are in, or evolution algorithms are in complex multi-objective optimization problems, right. So, it could be exam course timetables or any scheduling problem as we saw, or in computational biology it is used in phylogenetic trees, multiple sequence alignment, protein folding, identifying coding regions in proteins, clustering microarray data. For k-means clustering you can imagine that this would be very useful because its k-means clustering is again an optimization problem. Parameter optimization for kinetic models, which is where we started looking at it. It could also be used for things like electrical circuit design and so on, right. So, when to use evolutionary computation, right? They are often quite useful. What are their strengths or what are the challenges? One major challenge or one thing that you have to usually worry about is you need to have a careful choice of representation, operators and so on, but it is very useful especially when you do not understand the space. You have a really weird space, you do not know what is going on in that space, you do not know what is the gradient, you do not know what is the landscape looking like. GAs are useful, it might help understand the problem better. Once you solve a problem using GAs, you may be able to extract some principles out of it, that is a possibility, but there is no reason to really believe that a GA approach is better than any other optimization technique. So, and oftentimes although sometimes it might help you understand the problem better, a lot of times you do not understand what is going on, it is literally like a black box. You throw in some parameters, something else comes out, they are good, you are happy, but you do not know how you got there. So, the choice of representation remains the biggest challenge, and of course, I already mentioned the black box issue, and it is of course very expensive because you are evaluating hundreds of thousands of solutions, fitness function evaluations, right. Your population size might be 100 and you might run it for 10,000 generations, and so you are looking at a huge number of millions of fitness function calculations. Other related techniques, again similar recipes will be followed: gene expression programming, simulated annealing, ant colony optimization, particle swarm optimization, taboo search, interactive evolution algorithms and so on. There are various flavors to evolutionary algorithms, and all of these are useful for many kinds of complex optimization problems, particularly parameter estimation. So, if you look at parameter estimation, invariably in any paper you would find that they would have gone beyond the standard Nelder-Mead simplex or your MATLAB F1 search, because it is just not good enough to work in large spaces. Because the most important issue we have to worry about in large spaces is actually a curse, right. It is called the curse of dimensionality. What is the curse of dimensionality? It basically tells you that there is an inherent problem in very high dimensional spaces. So, as a simple example, let us just say this is some k1 and k2, and do not take this as the origin, maybe the origin let us say is somewhere here, right. So, I would say this is low k1, low k2, and this would be high k1, high k2, and this would be low k2, high k1, and this would be low k1, high k2. To examine 4 combination, to study a 2 parameter problem, you need about at least 4 regions to explore, that is 2 to the 2. Suppose you have k1, k2, k20, you are searching in R20, and you need 2 to the 20 regions to explore. You want at least one representative from each region to understand what is happening to my system, and this is already 1 million plus, right. And what happens if we are talking about 50 parameters, right. It will be, so 2 to the 50 will be greater than 10 to the 15. Right. So, if you go to larger and larger problem sets, you will quickly reach the number of atoms in the universe, right. So, basically these are very difficult problems to solve, and it is an inherent problem. It is not that if you build much better supercomputers tomorrow you will be able to solve this problem, right. It is a fundamental problem in such spaces where you have very large number of parameter sets to explore or very large spaces to explore, right. So, this is something that you need to really worry about. So, in practice, the size of your parameter set is maximum some 20, 25 if you are doing an unconstrained search, but usually you start restricting the parameters. So, I know that you know 30 less than k1 less than 3000 is already a great thing, because you are restricted to 2 orders of magnitude only, 3 orders of magnitude, right. Or you know that 0.1 less than k2 less than 10 to the 2, right. A few orders of magnitude, and this is already going to be very helpful. So, typically all parameter estimations have to be very constrained, otherwise there is no way you are going to get it. Best thing is if I know that k3 approximately equal to 520, let us say, great. So, it means that maybe it is only plus or minus 10 or something like that, right. So, if the tighter you know certain parameters, the better it is. So, these are some very good papers that you should consider looking at, especially the first one. It is from Nature Reviews Genetics, funnily, and it talks about evolutionary algorithms. So, it is a very long, it is a very nice detailed write up about several evolutionary algorithms. So, it is actually a shortish paper, only 8-9 pages, and but it lists every flavor of evolutionary algorithms. In today's video, I introduced you to this very interesting evolutionary algorithm known as differential evolution. There are many variants for DE as well, and I also introduced you to how we go about implementing evolutionary algorithms, what are the different kinds of selection methods or other kinds of search operators and so on. And we also discussed as to when one actually goes in for evolutionary algorithms and when the other kinds of algorithms are no longer useful and one has to resort to stochastic direct search algorithms, particularly like evolutionary algorithms. In the next video, I will introduce you to this very interesting tool called PyGMO, which is a Python based library for doing multi-objective optimization and so on. It supports various kinds of genetic algorithms and so on. So, I will talk to you about what are all the different kinds of algorithms it supports and some examples, or how do we actually use PyGMO for solving or estimating parameters and so on. And also give you a brief introduction to multi-objective optimization. What happens if you have more than one objective to optimize?